In 2011, an Australian bartender found a flaw in an ATM system, one that let him withdraw unlimited cash. For 4 months, he lived like a millionaire. This is his story. In 2011, Dan Saunders was a 29-year-old bartender in Wangaratta, a small town in Australia. One evening after finishing his shift, he joined friends for drinks. Realizing he had only $3 in his account, he headed to a National Australia Bank, NAB ATM, hoping to transfer funds from his credit card account to his savings. Attempting to move $200, the ATM displayed "transaction cancelled" and returned his card. However, upon checking his balance, he noticed the $200 had been added to his savings. Curious, he withdrew the cash and returned to his friends, puzzled by the anomaly. Later that night, still intrigued, Dan revisited the same ATM. He experimented by transferring varying amounts, $200, $500, $600, from his credit to his savings accounts. Each time, despite the transaction canceled message, the money appeared in his savings, and he successfully withdrew it. The pattern suggested a significant glitch in the banking system. The following morning, Dan expected his accounts to reflect the previous night's activities. Surprisingly, his savings account was $2,000 in debt, but his credit account remained unchanged. He deduced that the ATM transaction between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. were not immediately communicated to the bank's central system. This delay allowed him to withdraw funds without immediate repercussions. Over the next few days, Dan continued his nocturnal visits to various NAB ATMs. He discovered that during the early morning hours, the machines operated offline, enabling him to transfer non-existent funds from his credit account to his savings and withdraw cash before the system reconciled the transactions. This loophole provided him with access to substantial sums, far exceeding his actual account balances. Dan's initial confusion gave way to exhilaration as he realized the potential for this glitch. He began with modest withdrawals, but soon escalated to larger amounts, testing the limits of the system. Each successful transaction reinforced his confidence, leading him deeper into a cycle of exploitation that would dramatically alter his life. And so, that night, he went back, ready to test the limits. Dan had stumbled onto something unreal, a flaw so big it felt like he was printing money. Every night between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., NAB ATMs went offline, disconnecting from the bank's main system. Transfers weren't processed in real time, meaning Dan could move money that didn't exist and withdraw it before the bank caught up. At first, he was cautious. He tested small amounts, $200, $500, then $1,000. Each time the ATM flashed "transaction cancelled," but his savings still increased. His heart pounded. Could this really be happening? Then he pushed harder. $5,000, $10,000. Each time the system fixed itself by morning, but by then the money was already in his hands. For weeks, Dan waited for a call from the bank, a warning, anything, but nothing. No alerts, no fraud warnings, no one was watching. He expanded his operation. Different ATMs, bigger withdrawals, more frequent transactions. Still, no one noticed. Dan had access to unlimited cash, but the real question was, what would he do with it? Dan was playing a game with no rules, and the bank had no idea. What would you do if you discovered a glitch like this? Comment below. And if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable real-life tales. Dan went from bartender to billionaire lifestyle overnight. He chartered private jets, booked $2,000 a night penthouses, and hosted extravagant parties. He took friends on luxury getaways, paid off student loans, and even helped strangers. One night, he rented an entire nightclub just for fun. At first, people were amazed. How did a bartender afford all this? Some asked questions, but Dan played it cool. His girlfriend, however, wasn't convinced. She noticed his frequent late-night ATM visits and confronted him. When he refused to explain, she walked away. Despite the high-rolling lifestyle, paranoia crept in. He wasn't sleeping. Anxiety attacks became frequent. Every time he withdrew money, he wondered, would this be the time they caught him? Then came a close call. He tried to withdraw $900,000 in a single night. A bank representative called asking about the transaction. Thinking quickly, Dan laughed it off as a drunken mistake. The banker believed him, for now. Dan knew this couldn't last forever, but could he stop before it was too late? Dan often wondered, was he really stealing? The bank never contacted him. No one showed up at his door demanding repayment. No one seemed to care. He wasn't robbing a person. He wasn't breaking into homes or threatening anyone. It was just numbers on a screen. shifting from one account to another. Society tends to view crimes differently depending on who the victim is. If a person steals from a grocery store, they're a thief. But if a loophole lets someone take money from a bank, does it feel the same? People justify corporate fraud and tax loopholes all the time. Big companies exploited the system, and banks had been caught in scandals before. Wasn't he just playing the game better than they were? But as his paranoia grew, so did his doubts. Maybe no one had noticed yet, but eventually someone would pay for it. Maybe the bank would recover the money by raising fees on ordinary customers. Maybe employees would lose their jobs. What started as a harmless loophole was turning into something bigger, and Dan couldn't shake the feeling. No matter how much he tried to justify it, deep down, he knew it was wrong. That's when he realized, no matter how much money he had, he would never feel truly free. Dan found a loophole and lived the high life, but was it really harmless? Do you think exploiting a glitch is a victimless crime, or should it always have consequences? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And while you're here, hit the like and subscribe for more mind-blowing real-life stories. As Dan Saunders continued to exploit the ATM glitch, the initial thrill of newfound wealth began to wane, giving way to a profound sense of unease. The lavish lifestyle he had adopted, marked by the extravagant spending on private jets, luxury hotels, and generous gestures towards friends and strangers, started to feel increasingly hollow. The weight of his actions pressed heavily upon him, leading to mounting anxiety and guilt. Dan's mental health deteriorated as he grappled with the moral and legal implications of his actions. He became paranoid, constantly fearing that law enforcement would appear at his doorstep. Sleep eluded him, and he suffered from frequent panic attacks. In an attempt to manage his growing anxiety, Dan sought the help of a psychiatrist. During their sessions, the psychiatrist advised him to confess to the authorities, emphasizing that coming clean was the only way to alleviate his psychological burden. Initially, Dan resisted this counsel, clinging to the hope that he could continue his charade without facing the consequences. Despite his attempts to maintain a facade of normalcy, the psychological toll became unbearable. The joy and excitement that once accompanied his spending sprees were replaced by a pervasive sense of dread. Dan found himself unable to enjoy the luxuries he had once relished. Every indulgence was tainted by the knowledge of its illicit origins. His relationships began to suffer as well, with friends and acquaintances noticing his erratic behavior and emotional withdrawal. In a desperate bid to find relief, Dan made the bold decision to go public with his story. He reached out to the media, believing that by exposing the truth, he could unburden himself and perhaps find a path to redemption. Dan appeared on A Current Affair, a prominent Australian news program, where he detailed the discovery of the ATM glitch, his subsequent exploitation of it, and the extravagant lifestyle he had led as a result. He openly discussed the amounts he had withdrawn and the methods he had used to stay ahead of the bank's systems. This public confession was a turning point. While Dan had anticipated immediate legal repercussions, the initial response was surprisingly muted. The bank, embarrassed by the revelation of such a significant loophole in their system, was slow to act. However, as Dan's story gained national attention and public scrutiny intensified, the authorities could no longer remain passive. The legal machinery began to move, setting the stage for Dan to face the consequences of his actions. The party was officially over. Dan Saunders' public confession to exploiting the ATM glitch marked the beginning of a complex legal and personal journey. In 2014, he was arrested and faced over 100 charges related to fraud and theft. The legal proceedings were intricate, primarily because the nature of his actions was unprecedented, and the existing legal framework struggled to categorize his offense. During the trial, it became evident that neither prosecution nor the judge fully understood the technicalities of the banking glitch Dan had exploited. The National Australia Bank, NAB, was hesitant to disclose detailed information about the system vulnerability, possibly due to concerns about reputational damage and security implications. This lack of clarity complicated the legal process as the court grappled with defining the exact nature of Dan's wrongdoing. Ultimately, Dan pleaded guilty to the charges. In 2015, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison, followed by an 18-month community corrections order. Additionally, he was ordered to repay $200,000 to NAB, a sum significantly less than the total he had withdrawn, reflecting the bank's inability to account for all the missing funds. Serving time in prison was a transformative experience for Dan. The stark contrast between his previous life of luxury and the austere conditions of incarceration provided him with ample time for reflection. He recognized the gravity of his actions and the ripple effects they had had on his life and the lives of those around him. This period of introspection led him to a deeper understanding of the consequences of his choices. Upon his release, Dan faced the challenge of reintegrating into society. The transition was not easy. The allure of his past extravagancies contrasted sharply with his new reality. He returned to bartending, earning a modest wage compared to the vast sums he had once had at his disposal. This return to normalcy was both humbling and grounding, forcing him to confront the long-term impacts of his actions. The legal consequences extended beyond imprisonment and financial restitution. Dan's criminal record posed challenges in securing employment and rebuilding trust within his community. He had to navigate the stigma associated with his past, often facing skepticism and judgment from those aware of his story. These hurdles tested his resilience and commitment to forging a new path. Reflecting on his journey, Dan has expressed a nuanced perspective on his experiences. While he acknowledges the excitement and freedom that came with his brief period of wealth, he also recognizes the profound personal costs. The anxiety, guilt, and eventual legal repercussions overshadowed the pleasures of his indulgences. He has conveyed a sense of acceptance of his past, coupled with a desire to move forward and contribute positively to society. Dan's story serves as a compelling case study on the ethical and legal complexities that can arise from exploiting systematic vulnerabilities. It underscores the importance of personal integrity and the far-reaching consequences that can result from seemingly victimless actions. His experiences offer valuable lessons on the interplay between opportunity, choice, and responsibility. In the years following his release, Dan has shared his story through various media outlets, including podcasts and interviews, aiming to shed light on the temptations and pitfalls of exploiting such loopholes. He emphasizes the importance of ethical decision-making and the long-term consequences that can arise from momentary lapses in judgment. Today, Dan continues to rebuild his life, focusing on personal growth and contributing positively to his community. His journey serves as a reminder of the delicate balance between opportunity and ethics, and the enduring impact of our choices. So here's the big question. If you found a loophole like Dan did, what would you do? Would you take the money and run? Would you report it? Or would the temptation be too great to resist? Dan lived the kind of life most people dream of, until reality came crashing down. Was it worth it? For a few months he had it all, but in the end, the stress, the paranoia, and the consequences outweighed the thrill. His story is more than just a wild ride. It's a lesson in choices, risks, and how far someone will go when faced with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now we want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you love true crime, unbelievable real-life stories, and mind-blowing twists, hit that like button and subscribe. More insane stories are coming your way. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.